So you came here today to really understand probably the financial side of is early child care sustainable, meeting Rule 11 expectations in public schools in rural Nebraska. So I have some basic slides here now talking about financing that really help me understand. Kevin Lyons and Bryce Wilson can certainly help you in your particular situation because every school district situation is a little bit different. But here's a glimpse of Morrill's early childhood funding explained. So this year, the current 2021 school year, our basic funding we're receiving for early childhood education is $555,941. Now, some people will say, no, there's no way you're getting $500,000 for early childhood when you're only doing 4-year-olds and you have a 14.4 full-time equivalency of kids. So let's explain that. So this information is directly from Kevin Lyons, Bryce Wilson. And so our 2021 formula students with our 4-year-old count, our formula student count is 374 point, some change. And if we took out our 4-year-old FTE, which amounts to 14.4, then we would not have 374 students, we would have 359 and some change students. And so our basic funding based on 4-year-old through 12th grade is $5.2 million, and our basic funding based on our formula students without the 4-year-olds would be $4.6 million. So in other words, we are receiving in basic funding through the TIOSA formula $555,941, $556,000. Now, how many formula students you have, you probably know what that is if you're a superintendent. You may not know what that is if you're a school board member. So if you ask your superintendent for your state aid sheet, it's a 2-page sheet of paper that's given to us every year when we're getting ready for budget planning time. And it has formula students, and it breaks out of the formula student how many formula students you have in 4-year-old preschool. And so you can, with that number, you can call the State Department, ask for Kevin Lyons, ask him to use the same formula he uses for Morrill to do this very calculation right here. Now you could do it if you could figure out the TIOSA formula on your own, but it's more complicated than that because what they do is how much we get per student is based on our array of schools. And where we are in our array of schools depends on our student count. So the schools that form our array are the ones closest to us on our formula student count. And so if you take away students from your student count, then your array is going to shift, and how much you get per student fits into the TIOSA formula differently. And so that's the reason that Kevin Lyons is happy to do these calculations for all the districts in the state. I knew you'd appreciate that, Kevin. But this is totally you can get these numbers from Kevin Lyons, and it'll take him a couple of days to figure that out, but he'd be happy to do that for you. So that's, the previous slide was TIOSA. This is our local revenue from the 2019-2020 school year. And I have a summative sheet next to show you year-to-year comparison. But this year was unusual. We had more local revenue this past year because of the coronavirus. And you'll see a couple of line items there. So we have the DHHS coronavirus. We're a DHHS facility, and so we received $8,500 from DHHS because we reopened after we had closed. If we had stayed open, we would have gotten a little bit more money, but we did reopen in May after being closed from March. And then We also used some flexible funding dollars this year, which we had never used before for early childhood education, but we did use it this year. So we got a little bit more early childhood, and this IDEA early childhood, if children are on an IFSP or an IEP and they don't qualify for Head Start and they don't qualify for subsidy, then we have our special ed budget pay their tuition for early childhood education. Because everybody either pays or they're subsidized or they are Head Start. And so our IDEA kids are paid for from our special ed budget. So, but we have Head Start, we have preschool parent pay, we have DHHS subsidy, we have daycare parent pay, and then we have early childhood SPED, and then we have the coronavirus and flexible funding and IDEA, which is actually federal dollars. The early childhood SPED payments were up here. So $266,000 in local revenue. So year to year, we opened our building, this new building, in 2017-18, and you'll see that our total expenditures up here were $263,280. Our local revenue was just under $100,000. Our TIOSA was $174 for a total revenue of $273,000. So our expenditures, our revenue exceeded our expenditures by $10,000. Now, before anybody gets uptight about your revenuing more than the cost, I'm going to explain to you something about building at the end of this slide. But in 18-19, then our local revenue was $152,000. Our TIOSA funding was $390. And you say, wow, how in the world did TIOSA go from $174 to $390? And then in 1920, TIOSA revenue $495, and in 2021, $556. And you say, wow, how in the world is that happening? Well, first of all, our TIOSA numbers are in arrears. So we're getting payment for 2021. Our basic funding based on formula students for 2021 is based on 2 years ago, and so on and so forth. So our 17-18 school year was based on the year that we only had 11 4-year-olds half day. And then the next year we had 20 4-year-olds full day, so we went from a 0.4 reimbursement to a 0.6 reimbursement, and we doubled our student capacity, and therefore that's why we went from 174 to 390. In addition, our array changed because the 15-16 school year was a really low enrollment year, and the 16-17 school year was higher enrollment year. And so each year, as our enrollment gets higher, our array changes, and so the TIOSA is a complicated formula, but these numbers are directly from Kevin Lyons at the State Department. I haven't adjusted them at all. But our expenditures, $263,000, expenditures $296, 1920, $500,000. That's not an exact number. So before my slides go out to you, I will change that to an exact number. I did that before the end of the school year, so I'll fix that. And then in 2021, our budget is $510,000. And so, but you can see we are exceeding, we're exceeding our expenditures. Our revenue exceeds our expenditures dramatically. Now, are we charging too much? How can our revenue exceed our expenditures by $200,000? Well, when we agreed to build this building, we did a 7-year lease purchase agreement through the special building fund. So we actually took 6 cents out of the general fund and diverted 6 levy cents to the special building fund. And that 6 cents, depending on our valuation, is levying about $250,000 a year, and our yearly payments on that loan are $225,000. And so you look at the excess, except for year one, if you look at the excess from here to here, it's over $225,000. From here to here, it's $260,000, and from here to here, it's over $220,000 also. And so you can see our building that we robbed, so to speak, 6 cents from general fund, is getting reimbursed. That cost is getting reimbursed back to the general fund through our process. So our building cost is built into this. It's being covered by the anticipated revenue. We have 3 more years on our 7-year lease purchase agreement. So what we started off with $1.5 million loan, now we only owe $765,000. 3 more years of payment, we're good. So childcare is sustainable. So Rule 11, childcare is sustainable. We determined to maximize our programming in early childhood education by investing all of our early childhood revenue in early childhood education. Now, what I think to be true, before I knew what we were revenuing in basic funding for our FTE, we weren't spending $176,000 in early childhood when we had 1 teacher and 2 paras. And now that we have an 11,000 square foot building, and we have 14 or 15 staff members, and we have an early childhood special education staff member and an early childhood director. Now that we have those things, we're spending, as you can see, a whale of a lot more money than we did in 17-18, which was our first year. But the previous year we were spending 1 teacher, let's say, cost to the district $70,000, and 2 paras, another cost to the district of, let's say, $20,000 each. We were spending in staff costs, $110,000, but we were revenuing, $174,000, $175,000 on an annual basis. And so that's extra $60,000 we weren't spending in supplies. Now we are investing all of our early childhood revenue in early childhood education. So, things for you to consider. What 4-year-old FTE does your district have? So, how do you find that out? You can ask your superintendent for what your FTE of 4-year-olds is. How many full-time equivalent students do you have in 4-year-old preschool? And then call Kevin Lyons at the State Department or email him and ask him what is our basic funding for those 4-year-olds, and he can figure that out. And once you figure that out, then ask the question, okay, how much local revenue do you have for preschool? Do you charge on a sliding scale? Do you have DHH subsidy? Do you have a partnership with Head Start? So what are the other revenue sources? Are there more revenue sources? When I ask the question, what could you have or how much could you have, what I mean by that is if you've got a 12-hour-a-week programming, and that's all you're doing, then it's possible that all the kids, all the families that are interested in owning a 12-hour-a-week program are currently involved in your preschool program. But if you say, we want to meet the early childhood needs of our parents, and you're like Morrill, and Morrill had a scarcity of early childhood child care settings. There were, at the time, in 2017-18, there were 2 home-based daycares that serviced fewer than 20 kids. And we could easily, right now, we have 77 students. And all 77 of those students could not have fit at those 2 early childhood home daycares. And that's all we had. And so if your families are going to other communities, like ours were, ours families were going to neighboring communities to have their preschoolers or their daycare children go to a daycare or a preschool before going to kindergarten, and once they establish those relationships, we weren't getting all of our kids back. And so we literally had more than 100 students that had K through 12 that were not in our school, that were our resident kids, and many of them had started in early childhood settings in neighboring communities and just stayed there. So one of our strategies for school growth was to retain all of our early childhood children, or as many as we could, and then we would have them in kindergarten and then in first grade and so on. So before we opened this building, we had fewer than 20 kindergartners at Morrill Elementary School, and now we're running 28 to 32 kindergartners every year now that we've opened this building. And our first grade class is bigger, and our second grade class is bigger, and so on. So we are experiencing school growth because we're retaining more of our children than we were before. Another avenue of how much could you have is, now that we have this facility and we bus kids, we're busing 3 and 4 year olds. We don't bus the infants and toddlers, but 3 and 4 year olds, we put in a 5-point harness on the bus. They ride with the big kids, they ride with the K-12 kids. And we have them coming from neighboring communities. 4 or 5 different neighboring communities come to Morrill's early childhood program now because we have a quality program, and it's open from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. and bus transportation is available for those who want to cooperate with that and run according to the school schedule. And so we looked at how to maximize early childhood participation, and as a result, our revenue went up. So you guys have a lot of things to think about. How much revenue do you receive for 4-year-old, and how much local revenue could you have? And once you figure out those two things, then ask the question, how much do you invest in early childhood education now? So look at your staff costs and your supply costs for early childhood. And if they're just a part of your building right now, it's awful hard to separate out how much you spend for electricity or how much you spend for water, so that's really a wash cost. But what impact would it make if you invested all of your early childhood revenue in early childhood education? And we think that impact is significant here in Morrill. So, Rule 11 childcare is financially sustainable. It's sustainable because you can increase your local revenue, you can increase your TIOSA revenue. Let me address this, because I think there's people who struggle with this. You say, you're a board member or you're a school administrator, and you say, but our district is non-equalized. Our district is equalized. So what we don't receive from local effort in local tax dollars compared to our funding formula, our basic need, is made up for in state aid from the State Department of Education. Now, I know of districts, I used to work in one. I was the superintendent of a very small district, and we were a non-equalized district because our local revenue, our tax base, was greater than our formula need. But there are districts, and there's some really close to us here in McPherson County, in Morrill. In Morrill, some really close to us. And one of them levies like 63 cents. Now, Morrill levies $1.05, and that district levies 63 cents. Now, you say, but my district is non-equalized, therefore we don't get any of this TIOSA funding. Oh, I went the wrong way. We don't get any of this TIOSA funding. Oh, you do. You get TIOSA funding just like we do. You don't maybe get state aid, but you still get the TIOSA funding. So what your student enrollment is determines how much your budget is for the year. And whether you get all your revenue from local tax dollars or whether you get your revenue some from local tax dollars. We get 61% of our revenue from local taxes, and we get 25% of our revenue from state aid, and then we get federal funding and local dollars and so on. But whether you get it all from your local tax base or you get some from local and some from state and some from federal, you still have the basic funding. And so if you still get there's still a number of how much you generate based on 4-year-olds. The question is, when you find out what that number is, if that number is $200,000, or if that number is, I know of a district close to us that they have like 6-7 classrooms of preschoolers, and they've got to have an FTE that is, 10 times larger than our 14.4. And so their revenue, their local revenue, their TIOSA revenue for 100 FTE or 150 FTE has to be significantly more than my 14.4. I would think their local revenue, their TIOSA revenue for 4-year-olds is $2.5, $3 million. Are they investing all that $2.5 or $3 million in early childhood education? My guess is they're not. Now the question is, what if they were? So if you take that money, link it to your local revenue, and say, okay, we want to spend all that in early childhood. Well, that means we can do toddler care. That means we can do infant care. That means we can hire our early childhood special education teacher, and we can do on-site therapy of different sources, different kinds of therapy for children in the EDN network and so on and so forth. If you do that, does that decrease the number of students that go to kindergarten or first or second grade and need an IEP because we've mitigated the special needs and the social and emotional development shortages that are happening in kids before they get to kindergarten? That's what we think is going to happen. So that's the reason I've asked you to think about what happens if you invest all of your early childhood revenue in early childhood education. Now, there are some other challenges, and when we're thinking about the issue of, is Rule 11 childcare financially sustainable? Well, I think it is. I'm convinced it is. Our board is convinced that what we did was a great idea, and it is financially sustainable. But there are some workforce-related issues that really challenge whether or not it's sustainable. So let's talk about some of those things for a minute, because if you're going to launch into year-round, 11 hours a day, 5 days a week programming for infants through preschoolers, pre-kindergarten kids, and you're going to do it according to Rule 11, then that means you need to have a certified teacher in each classroom. Now, you can do the waiver. So the State Department's willing to let you do a waiver for somebody. You can hire people who have at least an associate's degree or 2 years of college equivalency, preferably in a teacher certification program. And they have to be enrolled in classes. They have to have a program designed, and that program can last no longer than 4 years. But you can go the waivered program, but 4 years from after an individual gets wavered, they have to be certified or no longer employed in your building anymore. And so at least no longer employed as a lead teacher. But you have to have a lead teacher with the certificate or the waiver working on their degree program in every classroom all the time. And so the first challenge that I have, that I'm raising the issue on with Rule 11, is the teacher leadership differential. Rule 10 versus Rule 11. So if a school has an after-school program, a K-12, If a school has a K-12 after-school program, or K-8 or whatever it is, You have to have a certified teacher lead that program, but not everybody interacting in all those various rooms or locations for the after-school program have to be certified teachers. And so you have to have one certified director, and then the rest can be classified employees, or even volunteers from the community that want to come in and do this or that or something else. And so, but in our building, in a Rule 11 early childhood facility, it doesn't matter whether it's before school, starting at 7 o'clock in the morning, or if you would start your program at 6, because there's some families that would like that. But after school's out for K-12 at 3:30, we're still in session with our kids until 6. At least some of them, not all of them, but you know, half of the kids are still here, some of them till 4:35, 5:30, 6 o'clock. And so we're supposed to have certified or waivered people with those kids from the time we open the classroom till the time we close the classroom. Not just one in the building, but one in each space. And so that's what I would call a teacher leadership differential. So that's for before school, after school programming. It's also for summer school programming. So a significant differential. I would lobby that that's a change that needs to happen in Rule 11. It has never been addressed before. So if we're going to have the allowance for K-12 after school extended programming, after school and summer school programming, to not be led in each learning space with sorry, our lights are automatic, so I wasn't moving enough. With non-certificated staff members, then why can't they extend that allowance also to Rule 11? So that's number one, Rule 11 challenge. Number two, contract differential. So here is our negotiated agreement contract for K-12 certificated, really infant through 12th grade certificated employees. The negotiated agreement has 184 teacher contract days and 175 student contact days. Our building, because we're supposed to have certified teachers in each classroom each day that we're in operation from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m., then really has 245 days of teacher contract and 239 student contact days. And it's a challenge. We find that there are lots of teachers that are happy to have a 184-day teacher contract, and very few that want 245 days of teacher contract. And so, I mean, if you look at a normal principal's contract, most principal contracts that I've ever seen are 220 days. And we're asking early childhood certificated staff to work 245 days. That's longer than the principal contract. Now, of course, they have to be paid at their daily rate above that, but we can't even find people interested in working, you know, a year and a third and getting paid like they're working a year and a third in 1 year, because a lot of people want to have a summer break and the freedom to do things with their family and so on. So the contract differential is huge. Staff development differential. Early out Fridays for K-12 for professional development. Early childhood building still has children. And so we don't get to participate in early child or in professional development days every Friday afternoon or most of the Friday afternoons of the school year like the K-12 staff does, because our building still has children. So when do we do that? Well, we do that on Saturdays, or we do that in the evenings, or we do it on, we even have staff doing trainings on Sundays because they need to get their training time in. Is not available during the school week most weeks, because unless it's a legal holiday, our building is open. The K-12 professional development often is not approved by NDE or NECPR. So the Nebraska Early Childhood Professional Record System, they approve certain trainings, they don't approve all trainings, and lots of what is necessary and pertinent and relevant and super beneficial for secondary, 7-12 teachers or K-6 teachers It's not going to be what gets approved by NECPERS. Therefore, what's going on in the district level has to be different in the early childhood building. And so our early childhood director doesn't necessarily get to participate in all the trainings that everybody else gets to participate in. And when we have guest speakers in for those places or certain programs, they're not relevant for early childhood, so we do our own. And again, we do them on the weekends or in the evenings. And then there's the workday differential. So in K-12, typically, teachers have to be at school at least a half an hour before the start of the school day and a half an hour after the start of the school day. That's in most teacher contracts. But at our building, we have kids from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. and somebody's got to cover those people. And so the workday differential is different. We don't have, most of our staff doesn't work from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m., at least not every day. But we have people that come in at 7, and then we have people that work till 6. And sometimes there's an overlap, and sometimes it's one person. Or 2 people working the same shift, depending on what the need of the program is. And then we have meal program differential. So early childhood needs to meet the regulations of the Child and Adult Care Food Program. If you have infants and toddlers, you've got to meet the needs of CACFP versus the needs of the National School Lunch Program. Again, it's a differential. So what our school cafeteria does for K-12 sometimes works great for 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds, and sometimes not so much, but often doesn't work for infants and toddlers. So our school meal program, our cafeteria, is attempting to design things that work well for infants and toddlers when that's really not their cup of tea. And sometimes they enjoy the cup of tea they have to drink, and sometimes they don't. And so there's a differential. So there are Rule 11 challenges. And I think that it would be nice if more schools would launch into the possible, sustainable early childhood program, starting with infancy, infants and toddlers, and 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds. Maximize what you're receiving in revenue, generate all that you can generate, and then invest it in early childhood education. But don't stop there. Then let's band together and let's challenge our lawmakers in Nebraska and challenge our State Board of Education and our commissioner to really think about some changes to Rule 11 that would even make Rule 11 early childhood education in public schools more manageable, so that we can do it not just financially, but also from the workforce development and the workforce recruiting and retention standpoint too. So that's the presentation for today. I hope it was helpful to you. I have, there's our Tri-Community Preschool logo, and here's our Pride Cub Care logo. I'm Superintendent Sherwood, that's on your slides, and our director, Sunny Edwards, she helped with the formation of this program and ran the camera today. So you can contact either of us, ask more questions, and we'd be happy to assist you any way you need. Thank you very much, and hope you learned something or gained something that was beneficial to you today. Thank you very much.